Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Tai'Shar, a Wheel of Time podcast. I am Will.
I'm Sam.
And we are taking off today into Lord of Chaos. So Sam is going to start us off here with a pretty newsy prologue.
Yes, sir.
One of the bigger ones. So
it is, yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah, this is one of those prologues where I'm listening to it and then an hour or 2 hours later, it's there's a fade out, and then chapter 1, a wind rose over this. Wait, hold on, what?
Yeah.
And this isn't the first one of those, but this is definitely one of the longest for sure. And it's great because it's full of juicy Forsaken gossip. We check in on half the Forsaken, including perspectives.
Right.
On Forsakens we haven't even met before, which is fun. It's great. So we start off with Demandred, who is in Shale Gul on the black slopes of Shale Gul and Thakandar.
I think this is the first time that we're really properly in Shale Gul too, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, we've been in the Blight, but not Shale Gul. Yes, that's true. So we get some awesome details. It's he says that a few hundred leagues north is pure ice, is in the North Pole or something. But Thakandar is dry as a desert. It's just because of the malevolent heat coming out of this demonic volcano. So there's a black stream oozing next to a forge, and there's these forgers that are like golems, stone golems that have been animated with a power or something, and all they do is forge blades for Myrddraal all day. Is what they do. So you just make these blades, and then they dip them in the nasty water to make them extra nasty. And then they have these hostages from the Borderlands that they kill to power them. So every time, say, Matt's fighting a Myrddraal and his Ashandarai hits the black sword and sparks fly. It's, sparks are the souls from Borderlanders. Anyway, so some fun details there. Yeah. But Demandred meets up with Shadar Haran. We've have not officially met him before. We've seen I think Robert Jordan described him as Shadar Haran 0.5
right.
in a previous prologue. But this is the real deal. This is the Myrddraal that's extra tall and extra sassy.
Yes.
He really does not know his place. He puts the Forsaken in the place all the time.
Yeah,
it's quite refreshing.
He really reminds me a lot of the Mouth of Sauron in the Lord of the Rings series.
Yes, there you go.
Who we don't get much of, but it's kind of a similar role. He's the mouthpiece for this kind of big disembodied evil.
Yeah, be it an eyeball in a tower or a demonic screaming volcano, whichever it might be. But Shadar Haran means hand of the dark in the old tongue. So, definitely kind of hinting that this is the Dark One himself in Myrddraal form, or some hint of him, perhaps the closest we can get to the Dark One touching the world while still sealed in prison. Makes sense. And so there's lots of hints of this being the case throughout the books. And the first one we get here is that the stalactites don't brush his head. So they're walking into the volcano, Demandred and Shadar Haran, and there's these stalactites that are hanging down. They're just over Demandred's head. He's they're just about to scratch him, but Shadar Haran, who's just in front of him, has plenty of headspace, and so it's kind of just a hint that this is someone to be respected and not just another Myrddraal. And Demandred certainly takes that hint. He's okay, fine, I get it. So they get to the end of this tunnel, opens onto a wide ledge overlooking a lake of molten stone. Sounds pretty familiar for those who've read Lord of the Rings. This is the Pit of Doom, and it talks.
Or anybody who's been to New Jersey, I feel like.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So this is the Pit of Doom, and it talks, yells into your head. Demandred says it explodes into his head, which sounds just delightful. But he says there's no roof, but it's more like a volcano. So there's a pit of lava underneath them, and then above him is the sky. But it's not the sky of the world of the Wheel of Time. It's some other place, some other dimension. But this always just makes me think of the skies in the video game Quake. If anybody's played that,
sure.
It's like the demonic purple sky.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of anyway. Yeah, there's Quake had a lot of crazy mods. I'm sure you could play Wheel of Time Quake if you looked hard enough.
Oh yeah.
I certainly know you could fight Pac-Man, the X-Men, That sort of thing.
all those games back in the day when it was all about the mods. I mean, there's still some, but it's like every game got modded like to be completely unrecognizable.
Yeah, and Quake and Doom in particular had they like the tools that the creators of the game used to make the levels were just open sourced, and so like anybody could basically make a level that John Romero made in Doom, and still do. I mean, there's still an active modding scene. Didn't want to spend $60 on the new Doom the other day, so I was playing Brutal Doom, which is like it's like Doom meets Counter-Strike, or not Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, because you can like zoom in on your scope. You have like grenades, so it's a very different Doom experience. Still Doom, but anyway, that's a aside.
It's okay. That one's free, guys. We're not going to charge you for that.
Yeah, exactly. No Patreon required. Demandred tells the Dark One about Ravine dying, and he thinks that he's often kind of surprised by how much or how little the Dark One seems to know about what's going on in the world around him. So at one point, the Dark One responds, "Done by my ancient enemy, the one called Dragon." So this talking demonic volcano regards a shepherd almost as an equal across time and space. As well he should, given the history there. But it is interesting to hear him call him his ancient enemy, as opposed to the creator. No, the dragon. The dragon is his ancient enemy. It's interesting.
Well, and I mean, we could go off on a whole thing here about the creator and his role, and who he puts in as agents and everything. Right. But
yeah, you look at the level of power that Rand wields later in the series, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, at some point he's pretty much has godlike abilities.
Sure.
So that's so at the end, the Dark One is whispering sweet nothings in Demandred's ear while screaming them, but we don't get to find out what he says here. So that's vexing, but as it goes. Then we switch over to Nynaeve, who is in Salidar. And her whole mission here is to try to figure out how to heal Stilling. So she's got Swan, she's got Lyanna, she's got Loghain. She just has decided that Stilling is healable, even though everyone says that it isn't. Moghedien, of course, who they still have captive, puts in that it was called severing in the Age of Legends, and gives no indication that it was ever healable in the Age of Legends either. You'd think that would have come up if it was. I get the impression it was not. As with other things that have been discovered more recently that weren't in the Age of Legends, I think this is one of those.
Although, I mean, if it was, Moghedien, it seems quite logical that she would try to hold that back.
True. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if it comes up again. Like, I don't know if it's ever discussed with any of the Forsaken. That'd be something I'd be interested if any of our listeners have any information about that. I would certainly be interested. So Moghedien is indeed still held captive by an Idom and is pretending to be their servant, Merrigan. Just close enough to, you could get it wrong and be like, oh, I'm Moghedien. I mean Merrigan.
Right.
That'd be okay. So Nynaeve has Swan and Lyanna there. And so she has them both put on the bracelet, the Idom bracelet, and Swan can feel emotions through it, which is one of those things that should only be possible for a woman who can channel. So that's one of those things that Nynaeve says, aha, it must be healable because you still exhibit some of these characteristics of a person who can channel. You just can't. So it's an ongoing plot line we see throughout this book in particular.
Right.
So Elaine shows up, and this happens more than once. She like slams the door open and scares the fool out of everybody. It's like, Elaine, don't slam the door open like that. You're like a toddler.
She is kind of a petulant child in a lot of her ongoing behavior. And I see why there's some people that just don't like Elaine for that. And
it's interesting. She is, and also Nynaeve is. And when Nynaeve is, Elaine is the one that's trying to act like the better person, like the peacemaker. And so,
well, it is funny because the people who like Nynaeve a lot of times are the same people that like really dislike Elaine for it. And I think it's because she's nobility. She's royalty. And so I think there's this sense of, well, hers is entitlement, whereas Nynaeve's
I
is.
don't know. For Elaine's, it always just seems like you just kind of shake your head and be like, yeah, of course she's going to act like that. With Nynaeve, I think the problem I always have is that it's especially obvious later in this book, Jordan is actively having to look for reasons for Nynaeve to be irritated and or angry.
Yeah.
That's where I'm just like, I'm just done with that. I'm just done with, let's just get past the block now because this is stupid.
Yeah, which is another major theme in this book that we will get to later.
Yes, indeed it is. Elaine is mad because Min is going with the Salidar Tower delegation to see Rand. Elaine wanted to go. She wanted to claim the throne. That's the reason. But the Hall, of course, won't let her go because they don't want Rand to have total control of Andor, because if he had her, then he has Andor, and they don't want him to have just absolute control, especially because Tar Valon is in Andor. So that's one of the reasons they really care about it, perhaps.
Yeah.
So Lyanna says that Min is going because her talents may be useful to Rand. Dang, Lyanna, jeez, twist that knife. That was definitely on purpose. That's
if you know what I'm saying.
Right, like nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Say no more.
Yeah. So everyone leaves except for Moghedien, and so Nynaeve, and this is one of the things that just happens over and over again, interrogates her more or less like Rand was doing with Osmodian. Like, she's just like, okay, you have this information, you're in my power, tell me what I need to know about the Age of Legends, about the Forsaken. But it does kind of occur to me that there's no, like, aside from raw power and capability, there's no wonder that Rand and Nynaeve are the two who end up being the most powerful sort of this age.
Right.
So in addition to the raw potential, they have that knowledge of the Age of Legends that they gain from these Forsaken. If only for a little while. And of course, Rand also has Lews Therin's memories, so that's fair as well. But clearly, Nynaeve has learned some things from Moghedien, although Moghedien, of course, does not volunteer anything.
And I really, other than they have the ongoing thing of being concerned about being found out with Moghedien, which is more of a legitimate concern than Rand had with Osmodian. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot of discussion about, kind of this morally I won't even say ambiguous, like kind of wrong thing where they're essentially keeping and torturing a war criminal and for ancient technology. And at no point is anybody saying like, hey, I know the end justifies the means, but we all agree that this isn't great, right?
Right. Yeah, they're not like light side Jedi here at all.
Yeah.
They have no problem with this at all. Yeah, they're just like, she's awful, she's killed people, we're going to torture her, she's going to tell us what we want to know.
Right.
We're going to threaten her with death if she doesn't tell us.
Yeah, and their only concern is getting caught. Not like, hey, should we be doing this at all?
Yeah, It's like they don't have time for that.
Yeah. I do think, especially in the reread, I do think that's kind of a funny thing that Jordan doesn't even get into that as like.
He just sort of ignores it. It may not even have occurred to him for that matter.
Yeah,
of course she's awful and evil, and you should torture her.
Yeah, I don't think it did.
Yeah, I think you're right. So then we switch to Elaine, who runs into random Aes Sedai number 30. Honestly, there's so many of those in this book.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy. It's honestly, it's a sign of the start of the slog. I like this book. I thoroughly enjoy this book, but there are those dull conversations where it's like, I have no idea who this is, and I just don't care.
Yes.
But they do break up those with some interesting stuff. I mean, there's a lot of interesting developments in this book, but it's like all those are in this book.
Yeah.
So anyway, Anaya and Janya Sedai are talking to Elaine about the Tirangriel that she's made. And she tells him some stuff, I guess. Then she goes to find...
I wasn't paying attention.
I skipped a couple of paragraphs, I feel like. It was like... So she goes to find Min, and why don't they fight? They should fight. I mean, honestly, they don't. They want to be friends, and they're forcing it, and it's weird.
Yeah, it is kind of strange that at no point do any of them. I mean, later on there is some different kind of tension, which we'll get to when we get to it. But there's no real like. First, we've got to kind of be enemies and then be friends. And the only way that I can justify that is I feel like Jordan may have been trying to subvert the trope of
Mhm.
women being catty and not getting along,
Sure.
and just kind of getting past that. And in one way, I'm grateful for it because that does get old quick.
So after Elaine, after this whole thing where Elaine and men talk, and they're like, yeah, she's going, it's okay, yada yada. So after that, we catch up with Fail, and this is one of the few times we see Fail and Perrin for a long time.
I'd actually forgotten about this.
I'm on chapter. Yeah, I'm on chapter. I'm reading. I'm continuing on. I'm on like chapter 22 now of 30 something, 34, and we've not seen Fael and Perrin again yet.
Yeah,
I can't remember if they have a chapter here or there at the end or something, but at what point they come back. But yeah, literally in the prologue, we get this just like throwaway scene where Fael is listening to petitioners in Emmons Field. So she's kind of passing judgment, and then Perrin shows up for a minute and says he feels Rand tugging at him to the Ta'Viran tugging, and then he must go find him. And Fael says she's going with him, and he says she isn't, etc. So kind of back and forth there.
Next chapter is Gawain, and it's where Gawain starts to become just the worst. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
I mean, like, we're gonna have plenty of time.
I agree with you. We will get into that. Yes.
We're gonna have plenty of time to talk about it. But so many people hate Gawain, and I'm of two minds about it because he is the worst, but also you feel for him because he's working off of terrible information. So
yes, yeah. No, like this is the book when I don't like him. Previous books, I really liked him a lot because he kind of seemed like the dumpier, but it's the plainer younger brother kind of, but yet he was the one that Egwene latched onto. But yeah, I'm with you. He's kind of an edgelord. So we get to Gawain and the younglings who are escorting some Aes Sedai from the tower to meet with the Shido. So a peddler named Old Mill shows up and tells them that Morghese is dead. So Gawain chokes him.
Yes.
and he's like, Old Mill's neck, my lord. Old Mill's neck. And so, but you can kind of understand. If some old dude just shows up and says the latest hot goss is my mom was dead, I would probably want to choke him too.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like this is just the beginning of it, though.
Yeah. But in like the fact that this random peddler is like, well, of course it was the Dragon Reborn. Gawain's like, yes, it was the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah.
So So then we switch over to some random red Aes Sedai. I don't even know. It's probably somebody important. I don't know. Just names I'm not familiar with. I'm like, ugh. Okay.
It's okay to not care about every character in this book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is Galina and Katarine. So these are Black Aja. We find that out here, and that's fine. There's a lot of Black Aja,
Yeah. Katarine shows up in some of my chapters later on, so.
Gotcha. Okay, yep. So they have orders to keep Rand alive, which is confusing to them and to us at this point. So then we switch over to Savannah, who reveals her plan: have the Karakarn chained in front of her tent like a vicious dog. And she has a thingamabob in her belt pouch that a strange Wetlander man gave her to use on him. We know what that is. No one who hasn't read the books yet knows what it is. Well, we know what that is.
Savannah is one of the dumbest people in the books.
Oh yeah, she's infuriating for sure. Like she's entirely too successful for a while, and it's like, oh my gosh, somebody needs to slap her.
Yeah,
stop her.
She at that point. There's points at which you're like, she's almost got Matt's luck to succeed in spite of
like her plot armor.
Yeah,
it's like Jon Snow plot armor here, level plot armor. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, well, and Jon Snow is an apt mention because she knows nothing. She knows nothing.
So true. So on to Morghese, who is in Amadicia talking to King Aelron. She's his guest. And he's kind of, lording it over her, saying, yeah, sure, we'll help you out, but, just not really doing much. And then Pedro Nile shows up, and so she's expecting him to like pull a sword or arrest her or something because Andor and the White Cloaks have never exactly been on good terms. But instead he offers to let the White Cloaks take back Andor for her, and rather than slapping him and walking away, she says, I'll think about it. And I think she probably was just being coy at that point, but it's hard to say for sure, really. I think she's at a pretty low point, and so she probably is genuinely thinking about it. So a kid shows up from Andor, says, I'm here to rescue you with my pop. So many new characters getting thrown at us. This is Peter Conal and his Uncle Jin.
The nice thing about this point in the books is that for the most part, if you get tired of any given plot, don't worry. You're going to be out of that and into something else pretty quickly.
Yep, that's true. And you do sort of expect that in the prologue, you're going to get a lot of character names you either haven't seen in a while or you haven't seen before. Like that sort of is par for the course. That there's a lot of that in prologues as we check in on characters we haven't seen in a while. So she asks him to tell her what's going on with the latest stuff in Camelin. How are things? Then we switch over to Pedro Nile after meeting with Morghese, who tells Caradin, Bors, if we're keeping track here, to stay away from Salidar and instead go to Altara. He says Altara and Merendi are about to be tormented by Dragon Swarm. That's his plan, I guess, to sort of blame the Dragon Sworn, but we don't get a lot of detail about that. So now back to the Forsaken, which is awesome. Really enjoying the Forsaken stuff. It's fun. But this is a Masana perspective of all things. I mean, we have not encountered her at all, almost at all.
And we're not going to get a whole lot more of her throughout the series,
no, we're not.
To be honest.
But it is like, oh, wow, this is a character whose name we've had mentioned, and we're getting a perspective. It's not much of a perspective. She's just sitting in a chair with Cimarog when Demandred shows up, along with Grendel. And so, she just is sort of like the perspective as we hear Demandred talking. It's not really, we don't really get a lot. We know she is in the White Tower, hidden somewhere, disguised, and that's it. That's all we know. She could be one of these many Black Aja or no one we've met before. That's just all it is. So Demandred asks if Samael is coming, and Grendel says he spends all his time marshaling his armies in Ilion and searching for Angriel and Sangriel. And Masana says, you ain't getting one from the White Tower, so don't think about it. Otherwise, you could find a stasis box, but it might be buried at the bottom of an ocean after the breaking. There's another reference to the Age of Legends, a stasis box where something is presumably kept from ruin or from corrosion of any kind by the One Power.
It's frozen in carbonite to be delivered.
Right, exactly.
I picture like the stasis boxes being really tiny, and when you open them up, like they just burst open like a Jack in the Box, and whatever it is just pops out full sized all of a sudden.
I'm with you. I like that. That's cool. Maybe it's a Rubik's cube, and once you solve it, it just like lights up.
Yeah. I like that.
So now we get to hear the sweet nothings that the Great Lord whispered in Demandred's ear. Let the Lord of Chaos rule. So now we have our book title. Well, if there was any question about who the title of the book refers to, I'd say it's pretty much dispelled now that they're kind of like, okay, this means stay away from the dragon. Don't mess with him kind of thing, and let him do his thing. Let him rule. And like starting the book, it's like, well, is the Lord of Chaos the dark one? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's room for debate, but I like the idea that the dark one is kind of trying to let Rand run a little rampant and hope that the madness will start to take him, and to some degree there is a measure of success in that, as we'll see in this book.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then after that, we switch to another Forsaken perspective. Man, it's just crazy. This is Osengar, who has just woken up along with Arengar. So Shadar Haran shows up and tells them to go to the world in the service of the Great Lord. And if it isn't immediately clear, these are Forsaken that Rand has already killed. Spun back into the pattern with new fires. Other than Ravine, of course, who is never coming back because he was burned out of the pattern with balefire. And also importantly, not Lanfear, because she fell into the Tower of Genjai.
Right.
So that is not Lanfear.
Right. And Asmodean was also killed with balefire, so he's not coming back either.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. And that's, it's something that most of the Forsaken don't know. We're sort of the reader is the only one that knows that, I guess is the reason it's not mentioned more often. The person who did it obviously knows. And we know, but no one else knows.
Right.
So like not even Rand knows. Yeah. So
correct.
And so Shadar Haran says, none but I and the Great Lord know you live. If you succeed, you will live forever and be raised above all others. If you fail, but you will not fail, will you? The half man did smile then. It was like seeing death smile. So then the wind rises over wherever the heck we are in Camelin. Chapter 1, the book proper begins with Rand fighting a bunch of randos with practice swords in Camelin. So one thing I really like about this book is lots of Rand perspective chapters.
That's true.
I know he can be, a bit ridiculous at times, and his general bleak mood gets annoying. I have to be hard like stone, and etc. I don't know, but I like him. I just kind of, it's of the three amigos, I'll even say Rand is my favorite. I guess. Okay. And I guess in a sense that's stereotypical because he's the chosen one, and maybe a little Marty Stew at times. I don't care. I like how he does cool stuff with the power. Mm-hmm. I like kind of I even like the loose Theron stuff. It gets a little old, but I don't mind it. I generally think it's kind of a fun back and forth.
I like it in this book. I really, this is when it starts to get interesting.
Rand is fighting some randos, and one of them, he knocks all of them out, but one of them whacks him in the face as he hits the guy in the belly. So Rand pays them all for besting him. He's being watched by a bunch of Andoran nobles, Aiel, and Davram Bashir. So we get a whole lot of descriptions of those nobles, and I immediately forget all of them because who on earth is going to remember all that stuff? I mean, except for Lur of the planet Omicron Persei I-8.
Right.
Or House Baron, whatever it is. But I just heard Lur. I was like, hey, Lur. Yes. So the various nobles are jabbering some, and maybe it's important. It comes back later, but this is just a theme for me in this book. I just don't care.
Yeah.
And I would have probably skipped a few more chat paragraphs if Lur hadn't showed up and made me laugh.
I mean, for the most part, there's a lot of politics in this that you can kind of skim over. It's not completely wasted if you read into it.
Right. Yeah, it comes back. Yeah, certainly. It's like if you go back and read something, one of Olorian or somebody said later, and then go back and read what they throwaway line they said in this paragraph. It's like, okay, well, you can see how they were scheming then, but like, okay.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, you get some places you get into the lore and the history more, and it helps you understand some of the relationships between characters. And it's, at the time, I will say on the reread, I appreciate some of this more than I think I did the first time through, when I was just like, what is all of this?
Yeah. And maybe it's just the fact that it's been so long since I read this book. Like,
sure,
it genuinely is like reading it for a first time. I mean, I was probably in high school when I read this book. Anyway. Bashir asks Rand, what the heck are you doing sword fighting when you can use the power? And demonstrates his point by lunging at Rand with a dagger, like lunging for his throat with a dagger, which of course Rand stops by tying him up in flows of air. One of the nobles yells, "Die!" unnecessarily, and unsheaths his sword, running toward Bashir. And Rand just was like, stop it. But he is very angry. Focused, he's pretty mad at old Dav. I mean, this guy was pretty gutsy to do that.
Yeah.
So Rand says he needs to be able to fight with the sword in case he can't fight with the power, because there are reasons that could happen, as we see.
Mm-hmm.
And Bashir responds that if anything gets through his multitude of bodyguards, it ain't going to be human, and a sword is going to do nada against it. So then Rand clutches his head as Lews Theron remarks that he deserves only death. I think I would probably do like, oh my, what? Stop it. Not cool, man. So yes, we are at peak Lews Theron voice, so strap in, folks. We will get more than our fair share of Rand behaving like a mad person. So Bashir responds to that by saying, we really need some Aes Sedai to help you out. And Rand kind of goes with his usual, I can't trust any of them. And Bashir makes a good point, though. There are plenty of kings and queens who really won't pay attention to you unless you have an Aes Sedai to tell them what to do, or to tell them that they should pay attention to you. So yeah, you could go conquer all of them, or you could try some diplomacy. And if you do try some diplomacy, probably going to need some Aes Sedai help. So Rand says that the rebel Aes Sedai are going to be a better bet. They will back him. And he hopes so, at least, even though he hasn't gotten a delegation yet sent to him. But then the conversation is interrupted when one of the Saldeans shows up and tells them that they have a visitor, Mazrim Taim.
Bum, bum, bum. Before we get into that chapter, I want to just say, in regards to Lews Theron voice, and this may be unpopular with some of the purists because it's not quite described this way in the book, but I kind of hope that when he's talking to Rand, that they depict him as a person standing there, so that we can.
Oh yeah, I like that.
So that we can kind of see him, and that Rand will even turn to him, and then it shows that he's not not really there, and that kind of
I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's a really good idea. Otherwise, it'd be like this echoey voice that would really get old really quick.
Right, and I think it would also give the opportunity of whoever ends up playing Lews Therin to really flex their muscles and not just be a voice and somebody that shows up in like one.
Yeah, because if it is just a disembodied voice, either we're going to hear Rand's thoughts, which is not something that's normally done in television and would be weird, or he's going to be talking aloud to an echoey voice in his head, which admittedly he may do.
Sure.
And I guess that would be fine. But yeah, I'd not thought about that, but I agree that would be far preferable and would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's been done other places to great effect. I think that's a really good point. I like that.
And I think it would work both for the dramatic moments when he's like ranting, just being crazy, and also for a few moments that could play a little lighter where Lews Therin shows up and suddenly says something really bizarre, and it's like,
or something bawdy. At times where he's like humming tunelessly about some woman walking by, and Rand could give him a look like, dude.
Yeah.
Because of course Rand is a bit of a prude at times.
Yeah. It's actually one of my
Lews Therin clearly isn't.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a farm boy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
After the igloo, he's like, we're getting married, right? We're getting married.
Yeah.
Right. So Chapter 2, A New Arrival. Mazrim Taim, false dragon who waged war across Saldaea, importantly, was captured by the Red Aja and then escaped. Has shown up in Camelin because Rand issued an amnesty for all men who can channel. And Tam is the reason Bashir and his army are in Andor in the first place, we should say, because Bashir was looking for him. Bashir is understandably not happy to see the fella. And weirdly, he doesn't recognize Taim at first. Mm-hmm. But in like, Taim says, like, I've shaved since then. But before anything can happen, Lews Therin seizes Saidin, more or less, through Rand and tries to kill Taim at first sight. And the quote, I just thought it was kind of a good quote. Lews Therin rose up in a frenzy in his head. Samael and Demandred hated me. Whatever honors I gave them, the more honors, the worse the hate, until they sold their souls and went over. Demandred especially. I should have killed him. I should have killed them all. Scorched the earth to kill them. Scorched the earth. While this is happening, everyone's standing there awkwardly. Right. As Rand is like filled with the power, fights for control.
And again, this is like I was just saying, couldn't you just see Lews Therin standing there, or standing kind of like right behind him, and seeing the weaves of the power like start to flow into the non-existent Lews Therin,
right,
like stand behind him like he's about to strike, and Rand like trying to hold him back. I could just see all that playing out much more visually than if we had to try to figure out a way to explain that without having an actor there.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That is a really good point. I think that would behoove the writers to do that.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a decision they've already made at this point. We don't know what they.
Who knows? We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will. Rand is staying there trying to get control, and Bashir sort of breaks the silence and says, "You say you're Mazrim Taim?" And he, of course, says, "I shaved." Then he proves it's him by mentioning some of Bashir's men who had tried to kill Taim under a parlay flag. And Taim killed them first. And so Bashir confirms it's him and is not pleased at all to be talking about this.
and then Rand goes, "I'm sorry, the crazy dude in my head was just trying to kill you." What were you saying?
I didn't catch any of that. There was this babbling going on. I couldn't hear any of it. Yeah. So I think things would go a lot better if he would just admit that sometimes. Because as we see, it's not necessarily the end of the world. Taim proposes a partnership between him and Rand. And this does not sit so well with Rand. So, he clearly makes it pretty clear that's not going to work. And Taim backs down pretty quick and is just like kind of smiling about it as he's like, "Oh, sure. Okay, I'll submit."
Yeah.
Like, dude. It makes sort of drive some of the point that only another man who can channel would behave like this around Rand at this point.
Right.
Possibly as one explanation.
Yeah.
And Rand asks him if he can. So Rand sort of just dives into it, and he asks him, "Can you teach other men to channel? And can you test a man to know if he can be taught?" And Taim says yes. And so Rand, and then he says, "I have a gift to give you to prove my loyalty, and it's an unbroken seal on the Dark One's prison." So Rand responds to this by lifting it over his head while muttering, "Break it. Let's break it now. Break it, break it, break it." Well, Lews Therin does that. That shakes Taim up a little bit more than that. and so he, Bashir like realizes what it is, and he says, "I don't think you should break that." Taim says he got it from a farmer in Saldaea who says his family has guarded it for 2,000 years and were kings and queens during the Trolloc Wars. And Taim says a hammer could break it, and we know probably a butter knife.
Right.
So Rand turns and asks Bashir why he isn't worried about Rand going loco. And so it's kind of a fun little scene. Bashir says, really, it doesn't matter as long as you win.
Yeah.
So he mentions this Marshal General of Saldaea who was the first commander over Bashir, who was just stark raving mad. He had a grove of oak trees chopped down because they were looking at him, and then insisted they be given decent funerals. And Bashir says, "Do you have any idea how long it takes to bury 20 full-grown oak trees?" But he was crazy, but he could outgeneral anyone. He's like, Bashir said he never lost, and so it's like, I don't care if you're crazy if you win. Like that's what matters.
I think Bashir,
and also you're the Dragon Reborn. We don't have choice.
I think Bashir is kind of a pragmatist, and I think we see that
for
here.
Sure. Yeah, and it's like, that's what we saw when he first showed up. He's like, well, you're the Dragon Reborn. I'm here to serve you, even though I don't know who you are, anything, Now
we're going to go into our spoiler section. So if you are spoiler adverse, if this is your first time going through things and you don't want to be spoiled, or if you lost your memory after the last time you read the books and you want to read them for the first time again.
Often I'm spoiling myself in these sections.
Right.
And I'm okay with that.
Then go ahead and shut it down and we'll join you next week. So Sam, you got some spoilers.
I do have 2 spoilers I wanted to discuss briefly. So in the Fael scene in the prologue, honestly, okay, so she was by herself. She wasn't with Perrin. I kept waiting throughout that scene for the Shido to show up and take her captive. I was thinking it was happening in this book. I was like, all right, this is going to be awkward. This is going to be unpleasant. And then it didn't happen. It's like, oh, yeah. That must not be either A, it's not in this book, or it's just not in the prologue. Maybe it's at the end of the book. I don't know.
No, it's not in this book. Yeah. You still got like 2 books, I think, before.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah,
that is incredible. Yeah, that's crazy. It's It's because it's such a shocking and powerful scene. It's just one of those that really ingrained itself in my memory.
Oh,
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
like when it happens, and
she gets like stripped down and they're taking Guy Shine. It's like, oh my God, Fael, no.
Yeah, well, and remember, it's in the snow because it's after the Bowl of the Winds has been used. So at that point, you have snow
seasons again. Yeah. So the other spoiler I had that I just wanted to talk briefly about is, okay, I knew that Mazrim Taim betrayed Rand. I know we had talked about that. And I was like, man, but after reading that intro, it's like, God, is he a Forsaken? Like, he's acting like it. Like, it really, I really, Robert Jordan really was selling that at this point. And so I don't even know that he was sure that it wasn't Demandred.
I agree.
Yeah, like, I agree. Could definitely see that. But then maybe he realized later there was too many problems with that and retconned it.
Yeah.
Like,
who knows?
Like you could see, like, maybe if he had inverted weaves to change his appearance, and that's why Bashir didn't recognize him,
Yeah.
That's why he had to say that throwaway line of that I shaved, because, it's like Demandred shows up in this book and has playing a role, and Mazrim Taim shows, and it was just like, oh man, it really would have fit together well in certain ways. In other ways, it would have been really problematic.
Right.
And just his confidence and his worldliness and his knowledge, it's like, it really would have made sense in a certain way.
The fact that he never seems to show any evidence of being affected by the taint, and which, I mean, it could have been he was just a dark friend from really early on.
Sure. And when I did think about that with the taint too, that like all of the Forsaken that Rand has fought have had that like black cord that attaches them to the dark friend, like a demonic umbilical cord or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that he always severs, and they're like, oh no, I can't get that. So I'm affected by the taint now. And of course, that seems like something would be harder to hide.
You're right.
So that would be a problem. But also it occurs to me that why don't the Lady Forsaken have that? Like, I guess they don't need it because there's no taint on Sidar. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. Maybe the demonic umbilical cord is just because of the taint on Sidene, or maybe it's just one of those things where men and women are different.
Who knows?
Hand waving or whatever. But yeah. it does make sense that he's not Demand Dread for a variety of reasons. But at that moment, I was like, man, is he? And I went and Googled it, like, oh, okay, he's not. Okay. I didn't misremember that. It was just definitely. Definitely was trying to make me think that for sure.
I don't dislike the character of Mazrim Taim. I only get frustrated because he's so clearly dodgy from the beginning.
And the fact that Lews Therin sees that, and Lews Therin's like, kill him. It's like, well, you should have listened to him, man. Jesus, he didn't say that about he doesn't say that about every dude who can channel.
Right.
It's not like every time that Rand talks to Grady or one of,
Niald or
any of those guys. It's not like Lews Therin starts babbling about killing, but just with freaking Taim.
Yeah. And so I think I mentioned this, but it does become like your sudden but inevitable betrayal, because the whole time
he's like twisting his mustache and
so you're hoping that he actually turns out to be an okay guy, and you're like,
you're just hoping he just has like resting bee face or
exactly,
and the old favored look or whatever.
But no,
he's actually awful.
Totally evil.
It's just unfortunate. And it's like come on, Rand, like, why didn't you see that? Why didn't you demand some sort of why didn't you pull a Gareth Bryn and demand some sort of oath or something, and not just be like, okay, I trust you even though I shouldn't? Like, dude, no, don't.
Well, I guess
he's like up to the point of not trusting people and then trusting them when he shouldn't.
Right. A little bit of farm boy naivety at that point. You have to,
I suppose so. He's like so preoccupied with being like cynical and hard, and that he's not paying close enough attention to the people he's putting in charge.
And also, I mean, Mazrim Taim is the first guy besides a Forsaken that he's met personally
that can channel. True. So it's like he wants to like him, maybe.
I think so. He wants to trust him. He wants and to feel like, hey, this guy just, kind of got the bad end of the stick there. So.
Yeah, for sure. No, I get that. I think there's some truth to that for sure.
All right. Well, so that's this episode. Join us next week when we'll be continuing into Chapter 3 of Lord of Chaos. As always, we want to remind you that you can visit our website at tsmpodcast.com and fill out our contact form or email us at stuff@tsmpodcast.com. And if you give us a correction, we'll be glad to correct ourselves if you are not a total jerk about it anyway. And if you're not a Mazrim Taim about it. Or if you have nice things to say, then we will mention you and say thanks. You can also contact us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter at Podcast TSM. We always love hearing from folks. So thanks for listening. And until next time, Tai'Shar Manethrin.